Early on, a group of slaves are shown being taught how to harvest sugarcane. A man lounges lazily on top of a cart loaded with raw cane root, watching the other workers work. At this point, we cut to a collection of makeshift huts. Slaves are presently engaged in the ritual of supper. After noticing the dark juice of blackberries, Solomon Northup is motivated to make ink and a quill. The plan, alas, falls flat. There isn't enough juice to go around. Later, in the cramped slave quarters, a woman awakens from her slumber and makes a sexual lunge toward Northup, releasing herself with his hand. Solomon has a brief recollection of happier times with his family, and the credits roll. Solomon's existence as a free man is glimpsed briefly. His mastery of the violin has made him a popular musician in his hometown of Saratoga. After putting the kids to bed that night, he has a conversation with his wife before she leaves with them in the morning to go to work as a cook. He mockingly laments that he can't sample her culinary creations. Next morning, he drives them to the airport to wave them goodbye. In the late afternoon, he runs into a friend who introduces him to two strangers, Brown and Hamilton, who say they are traveling performers for a circus-like show. The group offers him an exorbitant sum of money to come with them to Washington, D.C., and guarantees that he would be back before his wife returns. After some convincing, he decides to come along. The three of them are next seen in a Washington, D.C. eatery. His customers dump out a pocketful of coins that exceeds the agreed-upon amount. They toast with wine, and one of them keeps a tight eye on Solomon as he drinks every drop. We're all having a wonderful time. In an instant, Solomon finds himself awake in a dingy jail with chains around his ankles. We see flashbacks of his so-called buddies carrying him up to his hotel room, explaining away his inebriated state to the receptionist and other guests. Brown warns Hamilton that time is running out and that they must hurry up and finish. When they left, the flashback ended, and Solomon was taken back to the cell where he was told he was a fugitive slave from Georgia. He claims to be a free man, but he has no documentation to back up his claim. After being beaten severely, Solomon is thrown into a slave pen with other people. He talks to Clemens, an apparently well-educated slave, who warns him that their condition is hopeless. The mother, named Elizabeth, and daughter, named Abigail, are brought to the pen shortly after the son was already there. She puts on a courageous front while knowing what is about to happen. They are taken from their cells at night, tied together, and taken on a riverboat. They are taken down to the hold, where they will join the other passengers. Clemens advises Solomon once more to keep a low profile, this time by denying he can read and write. They meet another slave named Robert, who also has plans to start a rebellion and take control of the ship. They weigh the possibilities and ultimately decide to play it safe. A slaver comes to the hold later that night and wakes Eliza up to rape her. Instead of stopping the rape, Robert gets stabbed to death while trying to stop it. Clemens and Solomon are accused of dumping Robert's body in the river, and Clemens says Robert is better off dead. Soon after, they reach their destination, a pier. Clemens's master is there waiting for them, and he wants his stolen goods back right away. Clemens gladly runs down into the arms of his master, forgetting all about the intelligence he had earlier showed. Solomon has been left alone. A slave owner, ironically named Freeman, calls his new property to order after they have disembarked by calling out their names. He introduces Solomon as Platt, a name Solomon clearly doesn't know. After initially denying the identity, Solomon was hit. The slaves at Freeman's workplaces bathe in buckets of water, exposing the squalor of his enterprise. He enters the building and begins his sales pitch to the enthusiastic consumers waiting inside. Ford, a refined plantation owner, shows interest in Solomon Platt and Elizabeth. She pleads for him to take her children as well, but Freeman refuses and instead quickly sells her son to someone else. Ford makes an offer for her daughter, who is obviously of mixed origin, but Freeman once again refuses to lower his asking price. Ford's budget only allows them to buy two. Eliza loses it and cries her heart out, ruining the deal. For Solomon to lighten the mood, the Lord tells him to play the violin. Ford uses transportation to bring his new acquisitions back to his estate. The entire drive, Eliza has been a ball of tears. Ford's wife says she'll be able to put the memories behind her after a good meal and a good night's sleep. Tibiats, a slave handler, and Ford's overseer, Chapin, are introduced to the slaves the following morning. In a mocking song sung while the slaves toil, Tibiats warns them not to try to escape. They keep chopping wood and eventually run into a group of natives, with whom they stop to rest for a while. Solomon sees a violin and seems to recall that he once had one. The following day, Solomon approaches Ford, despite Clemens' advice, with a unique proposal, floating the logs down the river. Despite Tibiats's excessive condescension, Solomon's arguments manage to sway Ford's opinion. This plan works, and it puts Tibiats in an awkward position. As a thank you, Ford gives Solomon a violin to play. The loss of her children has left Eliza sobbing in the slave quarters. Solomon, annoyed by the commotion, engages her in an argument about whether or not she can make it in the face of Ford's good treatment. Eliza responds that Ford must know that Solomon is not a slave, but he still does nothing to set him free. It causes Solomon to hesitate. As Ford's wife can't handle the noise, Eliza is eventually sold off, and over the next few days, Tibiats tries to exact petty retribution on Solomon, which ultimately leads to a verbal altercation between the two. When Tibiats tries to beat Solomon up, Solomon fights back and eventually defeats him. When Chapin appears, he scares away Tibiats. He tells him he won't be able to help him if he runs, and he indicates that he'll talk to Ford about it. Much later, we learn that Tibiats has organized a mob to lynch Solomon for having the gall to confront him. When Chapin returns, he finds them prepared to hang him with the noose already over his neck. He drives them away, but lets Solomon dangle precariously from his toes, punishment for striking a white man. Slaves begin to filter out of their quarters, seemingly oblivious to his predicament. A woman stealthily approaches him with a water bottle and then immediately leaves again. Hours later, Ford comes back, returns, and cuts the rope, freeing Solomon. He brings him inside to be safe, but ultimately decides to sell him. It is not possible to stop Tibiats from exacting his revenge. Ford had sold Solomon to Epps, a renowned plantation owner known for his brutality, and this is where we learn of it. Epps reads a text from the Bible, interpreting it in a way that serves to affirm his authority over the slaves. The following day will involve a full day of cotton picking. Each worker's bundles are weighed at the end of the shift. The harvest from Solomon is below normal. The whip awaits the slave who picks less than the day before. Patsy, meantime, had output roughly double that of the greatest worker. Epps spends a lot of time with Patsy and speaks very highly of her. It's obvious he's interested in her, and his wife isn't happy about it. When Epps reaches the slave quarters, he wakes up the other slaves and leads them in an impromptu dance with Patsy as the star. Patsy has severe facial scarring after the Epps's wife throws a heavy crystal decanter at her face. She insists that Epps sell Patsy to her, but he says he'd rather divorce his wife than give her up. Solomon is dispatched by Mistress Epps to run a quick errand at the local convenience shop. She sees him reading the list she just gave him. Her warning to him not to repeat the behavior is unequivocal. When Solomon is on his way to the store, he gets the idea to try to escape but instead stumbles onto a lynching. After witnessing what happened to the two guys, his resolve was shaken, but he persisted in his journey to the shop. Observing the paper, he gets the bright idea to bring along an extra page every time so that he can write a note. Later, Epps sends Solomon to Shaw's property in the area. Shaw has enhanced the status of his slave who he married by giving her a legal marriage, at least on his plantation. Patsy is there on vacation and is appreciating the luxuries, but Epps is jealous that Shaw could try to shack up with her. After a short break, Solomon successfully persuades Patsy to come along. When they get back to Epps' plantation, he's visibly inebriated. Patsy overhears Solomon remark to Epps that he should stay away from her, and Epps takes this as a sexual advance from Solomon. Mistress Epps steps in after her husband's drunken pursuit around the yard to express her disdain at his fixation on Patsy. When nightfall finally arrives, Epps staggers to the slave quarters and rapes her. To punish Patsy for her husband's infidelity, Mistress Epps slashes her face open and scolds her. Patsy asks Solomon to strangle her later that night so she may get rid of her body. She can't take any more of Epps' rapes or his wife's abuses. No matter how much she begs, Solomon will not give in. After some time has passed, we can see that the insects have wreaked havoc on Epps' cotton fields. Now that he's lost 2 crops, he's decided to rent his slaves to a judge so that he can get some use out of them and make mortgage payments on his new property. Now we're back at the beginning, when Solomon is milling sugar cane. The adjudicator is impressed by Solomon's talent and suggests he perform at a neighbor's party. The judge has also ruled that Solomon is entitled to keep all of his compensation. There will be extravagant costumes at the party, and Solomon will undoubtedly draw similarities between his former existence as a free man and his current one as a slave. The festivities are ended and everyone should head back to Epps's property. Patsy's bloodshot eye reveals that her ordeal has continued as Solomon approaches the house. We've brought in the cotton crop, now it's time to get back to work. This time, a white worker named Armsby has joined them. He needs the money from picking to help him get back on his feet. Despite the fact that his output is much lower than that of any other worker, he is spared the lashing that is meted out to the other slaves. As he nurses Solomon back to health in the quarters, he recounts the events that led up to their meeting. He seems like a good person and a good listener. With the goal of securing his freedom, Solomon chooses to put his faith in him by entrusting him with the delivery of a letter to the north. In exchange for Armsby's promise to keep their conversation about the party's proceeds confidential, he hands up all of his money from the event. In 2 days, he will hand-deliver the letter to the intended recipient. Soon after, Solomon makes some ink and begins writing the letter. That same evening, Epps comes to Solomon's room and takes him for a stroll outside. Armsby has betrayed Epps' trust by spilling the beans to him. Thankfully, he shared his backstory before receiving the letter from Solomon. Quick on his feet, he manipulates Epps' prejudice against slaves to his advantage, turning the tables on Armsby and painting him as the one who lied to gain favor in order to secure employment. Thanks to Solomon's tale, Epps changes his mind. Solomon's dreams of independence are snuffed out as he burns the letter later. A little while later, we come upon a crew of workmen constructing a building with the help of a hired hand named Bass. Bass, a northerner, holds beliefs that are diametrically opposed to those of Epps, a southerner who is staunchly pro-slavery. They engage in light banter in front of Solomon, who seems somewhat intrigued. In the future, Epps gets all worked up over Patsy. Epps believes she has run away because she has been missing for some time. Even though she has only returned to Shaw's plantation to see her friend, he has threatened all the ladies there with violence because of his grief over her death. To prove her devotion to Epps, she says she went there to buy soap, a luxury that Epps' wife has forbidden her to buy for herself. She emphasizes, in a very loud voice, that she is valuable and that she has earned the right to be free of dirt and germs. Due to his wife's constant fighting, Epps snaps and orders Patsy to the whipping post. When he goes in for the kill, he realizes he lacks the strength to actually do it. He demands it of Solomon with a ferocious intensity. Solomon tries to take it easy at first, but Mistress Epps sees through his guile and encourages her husband to step up the punishment. If Solomon doesn't whip Patsy more, Epps threatens to kill every slave he sees with the gun he just put to his head. Having to make a horrible decision, he increases the severity of the whipping, which results in a pinkish mist of blood following each blow. Epps takes a moment, then charges forward, boiling with anger, and gives Patsy a swift whipping. Her body is torn to shreds by the cruel punishment, and she faints. The hired hand, Bass, and Solomon are left alone. Solomon asks Bass where he is from, and when Bass says Canada, he demonstrates impressive expertise on the country. Upon Bass's inquiry as to his many travels, Solomon reveals his precarious situation. Bass eventually accepts Solomon's account and realizes the magnitude of the injustice. As they keep at it, Solomon takes a chance by asking Bass to pen some letters to his pals back in Saratoga. Bass concurs. The job is done, and he walks away. Solomon is the subject of a lengthy shot. There's no way for him to know if Bass honored his commitment. No one knows how long Bass has been gone, but Solomon's tears suggest he may be starting to worry that he's been misled once again. Now we observe some men planting seeds and working the dirt. An official-looking man hails Platt as a carriage drives up to the Epps plantation, Solomon. When the man calls, he picks up and approaches him, a sheriff. A passenger in the carriage asks him a series of questions and gestures to another passenger. It's Solomon's pal Mr. Parker, a shopkeeper from nearby Saratoga. The sheriff is quickly persuaded, and Solomon hastily rushes to embrace his pal. A furious Epps yells hollow threats at no one in particular. The sheriff refutes their claims, and Parker ushers Solomon to the waiting carriage. Patsy appears and yells for his attention. Before leaving, Solomon jumps out of the carriage to give her a final hug. Patsy sobs as he goes. As of right now, Solomon is back at his house. There, outside his door, he appears to be filled with relief at having been saved from his nightmare. He walks in and is greeted by his loved ones. Despite being 12 years older, they are nonetheless shocked to see him. His daughter just wed, and they chose Solomon Northup as the name for their kid. They welcome him home with sobs of joy and relief. A string of titles explains that he filed a lawsuit against his captors, but it was dismissed. Northup turned abolitionist and helped numerous slaves escape. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for other recaps.